Hey everybody, my name is PJ Hagerty and I'm here to talk about the Pony Express and how technology moves fast. Before we start, letting you know that I work at a company called Mattermost. Mattermost is an open source collaboration platform for developers and DevOps engineers. It's a way to chat, collaborate, run through playbooks, do some kind of Kanban, different board style things that are all right there in one place. Great collaboration tool. Feel free to check it out at mattermost.com. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the Pony Express. So let's start with a little bit of history. A lot of people who watch Westerns or modern takes on the romantic American Western movement believe in certain things. The good guys always wore white hats, and they always won the day. Everything west of the Mississippi was lawless, and some bank robbers were actually kind of good guys, maybe not such bad people. And the Pony Express was how the mail got delivered. To many people, these are facts. Not just dearly held beliefs they were allowed to have, but they are facts. But they've been allowed to become stories, and the stories were built upon, and that's what made them seem so large and so present. But if we look closely, there's some holes in this story, and they're really big holes. Before we get too far, before even the Civil War, some folks decided that it was time to head out west to seek their fortune. So the United States was trying to achieve this goal called Manifest Destiny. Whether it was good or bad, that's up to you to decide. But the idea was to expand from the East Coast to the West Coast. For some people, this meant opportunity. Whether that was the opportunity to find farmland, maybe establish some new freedoms, maybe find gold in them there hills. Somewhere they were going to find what they wanted across America. When prospectors began to find gold in the California coast, towns began to pop up all along that coast. It was necessary for people, both the companies that worked there, the people that owned the land, the farmers, the prospectors, their families, all of these adventurous souls, they had to get mail as quickly as possible. Now, these remote locations were growing. Between 1848 and 1860, the population of California grew to 380,000 people. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's basically the Buffalo metro area. That happened in the course of 12 years. A buffalo growing up across a state in 12 years. Kind of crazy. There were very few ways to get information from one end of the country to the other, so a new solution had to be found. A lot of people are probably saying, but PJ, the railroads. And yes, the railroads. I get it, the railroads. While the railroads could get a message a good portion of the way across the continent, they really couldn't get much further than Missouri. When the United States gained New Mexico and Arizona as states in 1853, we could only just start to consider using the railroad as a way to deliver the mail. Let's be honest, the railroad back then was not so great. There was no guarantee of speed, and there was definitely no guarantee of safety. It's kind of like having a server in a closet being maintained by some person who had a general idea of how to run Linux or Ubuntu on a server. Kind of clueless, but they did know how to make their own Cat5 cables, all of which were kind of spaghetti strapped all over the place and going. It was definitely a fire hazard. Small closet fire hazard, very bad situation. It's unsafe, unstable, and in the case of the railroad, it was also prone to robbery. The railroad couldn't be the right answer for this growing country. Add to all this, these aggravating edge cases, like everything that's going on is super poignant, but also kind of a little bit to the side. Because there's also the idea of who is doing all this work. Who is building the railroad? Who is working on things? Some people wanted to bring the country together and make it bigger and larger and the best thing in the world. And others wanted to remain on top of the pile by oppressing other human beings. This was wrong. War was on the horizon. If we wanted to continue to be successful and move forward as a country, as a people, we needed a way to communicate quickly. On the eve of the American Civil War, the Pony Express was born. A network was built. Now, this was simple. Riders, generally young, often orphans, sometimes escaped slaves, they would be hired to ride like the wind. The Pony Express began its ride on April 3rd, 1860. Suddenly, you could get a message from New York to California in just 10 days. Whoa! It was a miracle of modern communications. If we've learned anything from the movies about the Pony Express, it's how ubiquitous and long-lasting it was. It seems every Western has a reference to the Pony Express. There have been movies and television shows dedicated to the brave riders and their horses, flying across the plains, outwitting dangerous animals, bandits, Native Americans who were kind of upset that we were taking their lands and territories. Sorry, but they were rightfully upset about that. The Pony Express was a paragon of innovation in April of 1860. However, this great technique for moving messages coast to coast was outdated after a mere year and a half. before even the railroads made it all the way across the country. The needs of the people and the speed of technology overtook these Western riders. So instead of innovation, the Pony Express was really just a stopgap method. It was a way to kind of get around the fact that we couldn't do it. But once the telegraph came along, we could. And the Pony Express would have remained a footnote in American history were it not for the so-called penny dreadfuls that raised these riders and their horses to legendary heroic status. A simple device at the right time, a time when war was starting, communication needed to move faster than ever before. All this culminated in the end of the Pony Express after a mere 18 months of operation. As a side note, think of the telegraph and the Pony Express the next time you have a conversation about automation or machines replacing people. Automation's not a new issue. When's the last time you tipped your elevator operator? So, if the Pony Express is a stopgap, how long did the telegraph last? Come on, PJ, you say to yourself. There's no way it lasted that long. You know, I'm glad you brought this up, actually. I'm glad we're having this talk. I feel like we really need to clear the air. Perhaps you've heard of this British person, sometimes called the father of modern computer science or the modern computing. In World War II, about 80 years after the Civil War, Alan Turing was in England trying to decipher telegraph messages that were encoded using the above machine, which is known as the Enigma. It's a way to encrypt and decrypt messages sent via telegraph. So this is simple encryption, or so we think. It's actually still really difficult to decrypt. But the telegraph had lasted 80 years at that point in time, much longer than the Pony Express. Yet I've never seen a movie called The Telegraph. I guess it's just not that exciting a piece of equipment. Some pieces of technology last a long time. Some opportunities are good. Others fade quickly and tend to disappear. We see this all the time in the world of building applications. I mean, unless all of you plan to share your thoughts on this talk on your Bebo page or maybe on LiveJournal, you can see what I mean when things change pretty quickly. So let's take a look at some things and see their lasting power. Maybe we can speculate on what has staying power and what is more a flash in the pan, which, by the way, is literally an 1849 gold prospecting term. I didn't just pick that up out of nowhere. So let's start with a philosophy lesson. Philosophies around technology are not a new phenomenon. Whether it's the idea that the mainframe computing is the only true computer science solution, or the idea that DevOps can be certified and assigned as a team, there's never been a shortage of ideologies that accompany the work we do. Most philosophies are really meant as best practices. They allow our work to flow easily, produce our applications, make things run better on networks or in data centers, on Earth, in the cloud, whatever. They're kind of the flowery utopia. Some are only suggestions because something worked on my machine, so it must work for everyone else. So let's take a look at some of the most common modern era philosophies and see what the strengths are and where the pitfalls might be. Now, we're not too far from this, so let's start with Waterfall. Waterfall is probably one of the most well-known and much maligned development methods in the world today. How many folks out there have been involved in an organization using the Waterfall technique, whether they admit it or not? I mean, I'm not right now, but I have been. For those not in the know, here's the definition of Waterfall, and this is my definition voice. The Waterfall method is a relatively linear, sequential design approach for certain areas of engineering design. In software development, it tends to be among the less iterative and flexible approaches, as progress flows in largely one direction, downwards like a waterfall, through the phases of conception, initiation, analysis, design, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Pretty thorough idea for an idea that was developed in the 1950s, a little more or less 10 years after Turing was dealing with the telegraph and figuring out how to encrypt things on basically a typewriter with gears and cogs. And now we're trying to figure out how computer science works using engineering techniques built for car manufacturing. See how that worked out. So let's look at it. It's pretty simple. As our programming teams begin to build applications for business and scientific inquiry, we needed a way to establish how things would be organized. Is it in any way surprising that our first thought is to take a page from modern manufacturing? Probably not. To build a car, you establish requirements, you design it using those requirements, you build the car, you test to see that it works more or less, and maybe you do some maintenance once it's out on the road. Easy, right? Why wouldn't software work in the same rigid way? It's so simple. The problem with this philosophy, like so many first ideas, like the Pony Express as a matter of fact, is short-sightedness. What works in one industry does not necessarily work for another. In a few minutes, we'll discuss the Agile methodology. much of which focuses on the concept of lean, which is an idea that was brought over from Japan's car manufacturers. But there's a difference in how these ideas were adopted. For Agile, we borrowed. With Waterfall, we just took it all. Waterfall has no iteration. It has no feedback loop. There's no structure. Once things go out, we hope for the best. Most people know when an organization is not flexible that it spells doom. Waterfall's doomed philosophy before it got off the ground. Yet, parts of it are still used today in big, large-scale corporations. Wild, I know, but it's true. By the way, if you want to know how waterfall doesn't work, take a look at how fixing a waterfall doesn't work. And I always feel like this is a good example. This is Niagara Falls. When they tried to stop it to prevent the erosion, what they actually did was drill rods into Niagara Falls. And what they actually did was cause further erosion faster and more efficiently. So, waterfalls, watch out for them. Now, after Waterfall, we came up with this idea of Agile. Agile is more modern. It's a more widely accepted philosophy in the world of tech. And while the world conjures up these images that may or may not work alongside the ideals of the philosophy, let's define what it is before we take any action or make any decisions. Agile is an approach to software development under which requirements and solutions evolve through the collaborative effort of self-organizing in cross-functional teams and their customers or end users. It advocates adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, and continual improvement. It encourages rapid and flexible response to change. This sounds awesome after Waterfall, right? Self-organizing teams, iterative development, customer input. What could possibly go wrong? Agile is a space-age solution. Everything we're looking for here. Iteration, collaboration, flexibility. At the advent of Agile, which was, believe it or not, the 1970s, so about 20 years after Waterfall, there still wasn't much need for adherence to a software development philosophy. Most software was built for and by large-scale corporations. Computers weren't common in homes, and even entertainment systems like ColecoVision and Atari were only becoming a thing. Agile was a sleepy philosophy for a while. Then, as more modern application development and deployments grew in the 90s, especially open source, it began to take off. We couldn't just apply normal manufacturing techniques anymore. We had to build software and deploy it in a real way that really worked. So we applied Agile to the problem at hand as something modern and different. So it was amazing modern workflow. And that really comes from the problems come in at the peripherals. Things like Scrum, Kanban, add-ons that aren't necessary and don't really contribute to the success of the team. Agile means flexible, right? If your team can work without the overhead of complicated necessities like daily stand-ups or raft teams, Agile probably will work for you. As with any philosophy, zealotry and strict adherence is going to stagnate growth. If you need to follow the rules as strictly as possible, that's not very flexible, and that means it's not very agile. As a great bonus, though, Agile led us to something new. The reason we're all here. DevOps. DevOps is a set of software development practices that combines software development, dev, and information technology operations, ops, to shorten the system's development lifecycle while delivering features, fixes, and updates frequently in close alignment with business objectives. Different disciplines collaborate, making quality everyone's job. Personally, I love this definition. I really do. It's really what all the other philosophies are trying to find, right? They want to know how a team should function. They want to build things together. It's all the best parts of Agile, the few good ideas from Waterfall, applied to all teams across an organization. That's awesome. Everyone is part of the conversation. Everyone is responsible. This is our modern answer on how to best deliver software. Mobile, web, operating systems, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Whatever you're building. We've learned from the past, and this is what we have. So DevOps, according to some, should be the end-all, be-all of development. We introduced the concepts of interaction with developers and ops and IT testing. We add in some of their stuff, QA. Great cycle, brilliant. What do we focus on? Automation! Yay! DevOps' goals, according to some people, and I know that not everybody agrees with this, is to automate as much as possible in order to remove risk. I mean, isn't that really what happened to the Pony Express? We needed to move messages faster, but we also needed to kind of pay attention to the people's lives. And we were doing that to increase safety by doing it electronically. We didn't need people anymore. So instead of doing it manually on horseback, we automated it. We built a system that made the old system less useful. Makes one wonder if the point of DevOps is to make DevOps unnecessary. Like all theories, DevOps is great in theory. Everyone works happily together now because we're employing DevOps, right? All the problems are resolved and we all get along and the world is at peace and applications work perfectly. DevOps, it works 60% of the time, every time. Like Waterfall and Agile before it, DevOps has one major downfall. It is based on the perfect world idea. In a perfect world, all these things work together. In a perfect world, everything works in the way that we want it to. But when faced with the reality of organizations functioning at modern speed, some of these things begin to fall down. This doesn't mean we should abandon hope, all ye who DevOps. But we need to see where the problems are and where these philosophies work and where they don't. We need to take our organization's perspective into account and understand that to achieve our goals, we need to be critical of the things that we do and find the parts that don't work. All the things in tech should be in constant evolution. There is no end goal. Whoever writes software that's done, if you have, please get at me. Add a Splenic on Twitter. I would love to see what you've done. So beyond our methodologies for how infrastructure or our team works, we need to actually build things. This is a crazy concept, I know, but stick with me on this. Whether it's ops or dev, we need these ideas to actually be built. So let's start with some of the ways that we build things. We'll start with the idea of test-driven development. So this is a concept that everything you build, software, hardware, doesn't matter, application, infrastructure, database, must be thoroughly tested before going out into the world. This is a great idea, except that it takes at least twice as long to build anything. Additionally, since you never really know how people are going to use the thing once it goes out in the world, you can be needlessly pedantic. You can end up like, hey, we've got all these tests and it's great. We understand exactly how everything works. But in reality, you don't know how anyone's going to use it. So what have you done? 98% test coverage doesn't mean test coverage. So maybe behavior-driven development is what we're looking for. Unlike test-driven development, behavior-driven development is based on how users interact with stuff, like how they break things, and how they like absolutely destroy the things that we do because we had no idea what their intentions were. So forward thinking, right? Let's see how users do things and build what based on that. Less time spent than TDD, right? I mean, maybe, but it also leaves a huge possibility for failing over and over again. I'm not talking about the whole like Steve Jobs fail fast, fail upward kind of model. I'm talking about like, actually failing, actually have an application that's failing out in the world. Luckily, from the BDD movement, DevOps culture has also been able to adapt and adopt the concepts of chaos engineering, which help us make our systems more resilient. This is great and behavior-based, so even out of the most misguided philosophies, we can cull some good. But let's talk about how things work in the real world. What really goes on in every organization, this is my personal opinion, I've had many talks with many people who might actually be at this conference about this, is shame-driven development. People will only write as many tests as they can get away with so that the next developer or ops person or hardware engineer that sees it doesn't think they skipped it altogether. The ops person only takes their time in setting up physical hardware so it seems their time was worth it. They'll only document the things that make sense. The SRE holds everything together with duct tape and bubblegum, but documents a well-running system. Whether DevOps or Agile or what have you, doesn't really matter. We generally build things so we won't be shamed by the next person to see it. This is the truth of where most things live in the world of tech today. Kind of like how the Pony Express was built good enough for what the United States needed at the time. We innovate. We want to innovate. We want to build innovative things, innovative apps, innovative teams, great cultures, and things like that. But the problem is we focus too often on minimal viable product, minimal viable setup, minimal viable service, minimal viable. Just the language we develop and comes with the philosophies and the ideas that matter to some people, but they seem to be less and less important as time marches on. Do we use compiled languages or non-compiled? Open source, enterprise, languages like C++, .NET, or PHP, Ruby, Python, Go. Like, what do we decide on? Where do we land? We're seeing now a return to functional programming practices while also seeing the growth of JavaScript tools focused on building single-page web applications. How can these things all be happening at the same time? These choices lead to things like not needing a proper server, deploying a GitHub page with like Jekyll or Middleman or Gatsby.js. You don't even need an ops team, right? Things are happening so fast, but these aren't really innovations. These are iterations on the same circle of concepts. We're not building new things so much as solving the same problems in different ways. So we strive to keep moving forward. DevOps is our current Pony Express. Is it? Will it last longer? Will it become the telegraph of this philosophical generation? When we think of the word innovation, we think of building something new, discovering some new territory. We've done that by bridging the gap between teams and our common goal. That's the point of DevOps, bringing people together under one roof, right? DevOps has taken us a step further to getting rid of those accoutrements to Agile, all the rules and siloing and things like that, and saying, hey, we're all here to do the same thing. Let's work together. Let's try to reach our goals. That's innovation. That's riding out to outlast the competition. Technology moves fast. We need to learn to adapt and innovate if we hope to keep up. So we see things come and go. We see innovation built on failure. Philosophies grow from simple, adopted ideas, concept borrowed from somewhere else and then retrofitted to our needs. We see that what was the best solution today might be outdated tomorrow. When adopting DevOps culture and ideals, we seek to find the best solution for our teams and our development and our QA and our ops environment. We should never accept these ideas blindly, though. We must question them every step of the way. At some point in time, there was a young man on a horse racing across the hills of California to deliver a message. He never read it. That wasn't his job, and if we're completely honest with ourselves, he probably couldn't. His job was to deliver. And that message read, "Telegraph service reaches San Francisco. Pony Express retired." Every point of our jobs in technology is to innovate and build. We continue to do so knowing that the future is our goal, not the nearby goal. It's our far-reaching goal. With that, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful time at DevOps Days Buffalo.